morning. This is Cheryl Guess from the Center for Spiritual Living in Palm Desert, California. And today I have a subject that it's kind of one of those tricky ones. It can go either way, but it's called perception versus perception. Perspective versus perception. There, I already did it. But anyway, and I have with me today, if you wouldn't mind, Krista, showing us side by side, I have Lori Savage, Reverend Lori Savage from the Global Truth Center and wherever that is. Anyway, it's
Los Angeles, Westlake.
Los Angeles, thank you. Anyway, so she's going to be joining me today, and as we examine this and look at different ideas around how your perspective can affect your perception, and the other way around, how your perception can skew your perception. So anyway, perspective. I'm doing it again, Doc. I realize it's going to be a difficult one to do. But
That's so good though, because that just illustrates how intertwined they are, right? It's hard to separate the two, so it's perfect.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to start us off with just a little invocation to put us in the right frame of mind. And so just join me in taking a deep breath in and just releasing anything that's not serving you right now, or releasing any kind of tension just by using that oxygen, that breath, just to release everything that needs to go. And so just know with me that there's only one power present in this moment. And our perception and our perspective is all from this one power. And we have the choice, we have the volition to choose how we perceive something or what our perspective is by moving ourselves or by moving our minds. And so I just know today that our minds are open and receptive, as well as our hearts, and everything is unfolding in divine, perfect, right order as this show proceeds. And so it is. Amen. So
it is.
Your perception of a situation depends upon your perspective.
So, and I say it's the other way around.
Yes, and that's why this is going to be so good. I'm using it from this point of view. I don't know if you saw my banner when you came on. Mm-hmm. The banner is trees. But if you're standing in a certain spot, you see a woman's face created, with a few lines here and there, but you see this woman's face. And so, but if you think about it, you had to be standing in the right, perfect spot to see this face in the trees. And if you had come into this place where this face appeared just 2 feet over, you wouldn't have seen it. It wouldn't have been there. And so sometimes when you're looking straight on at something, that's where you can form a different perspective or perception of what's going on in reality. Because in reality, these are just some trees growing. You just happen to sit in the perfect space at this perfect time in order to see it. So does that make you wonder, if your perspective is skewed about something, do you need to step over a couple of feet and look at it from a different perspective? So where do we get our perspective? I'm going to give that one to Lori. Where do we get our perspective from, Lori?
I believe it comes out of our perception. I believe that perception is cause and perspective is effect.
And I'm the opposite.
Yep. So perception is your belief about life. Everything comes through that filter. And your perspective, you will only see what fits with your perception of life. So when you back it up to what do I believe? Well, whatever you believe to be true, that is the perspective you will have. That's the viewpoint. That puts you in a space to see either the trees or the woman's face.
Exactly.
To use that metaphor. Mm-hmm. It's your worldview will inform your perspective on everything. And so asking like really good questions, as you said earlier, where are you standing, right? Are you looking from here? Are you looking from here? If you're looking straight on, what you said earlier, you're not seeing all of this. And so asking questions to take your view out. So in order for me to experience this, my favorite thing, I know Dale's on today, and I bet she knows what I'm about to say. In order for this to be my perspective, what must I believe? in order for this to be true for me in my physical reality, for this to be my viewpoint, what must be behind that, which is my perspective, my belief system. So that's my perspective. and I come from, one is cause and one is effect. So I'm eager to hear that flipped, make perspective, cause, and perception. These are easy words to get confused, right?
But they work either way. It's so
Yeah.
crazy, isn't it? But all right, for me, your perception of something is built on what your perspective was at the time that you experienced something. So if you're from a child's point of view, your perception of what's going on around you is different than if you're looking at from an adult point of view. And you have to remember though, but when we're born, we're like blank slates. We just have no preconceived notions. We have no preconceived ideas about anything. And then what happens is through our perception of we form our perception by what goes on around us, our perspective. So if we're in a family with the perception or the perspective is that it's a dysfunctional and it's very difficult to live in this family, then we can form a perception that that's how all families are. Or we can, so that's why it's so important that when we start building this belief system, I like to call it the BS, when we start building our BS, our belief systems, then we have to and that's all from being a child and what we have experienced as far as that's going on. So if we're like I said earlier, but when you become an adult, sometimes you just need to go back and look at it. Why did I form this perspective, this belief system? How did this happen? And it can be just the smallest little thing can happen. It's just like with the stove. You touch a stove and it's hot, then you know not to do that again. But does that mean that you should go into fear around the stove? No. It just means that you have to have a different belief system around the stove. You don't touch it with your hands. You just have to form a different belief. And it's that simple as forming your beliefs. That's why as an adult, it's so important to go back and examine all of this stuff that you've gathered up like a little Hoover all through your life, and just stop and look and see why did I form this perception and why did I form that belief around this? So Lori, what's your take on that?
Well, it's interesting. So if you've ever seen siblings who grew up in the exact same circumstance and they pull for completely different, their perspective is very different about what happened in their family. Sometimes you can listen to them. It's like they came from two different families. Like you would never even know that they grew up under the same set of circumstances. Why is that? Because their perceptions were different. And they literally were having a different experience. So the question, oops, it went away. The question that just came up was what impact do our experiences play in perception and perspective? Well, they play a lot because there's a back and forth. It's two sides of the same coin. But if your perspective is one of wholeness, life unfolding perfectly, Ernest Holmes said the only thing we ever need to shift is our perception. If we change our perception to one of wholeness, and which means life is unfolding perfectly, our perception is that we live in an orderly universe, right? That nothing is random. Einstein, one of my favorite Einstein quotes is about that. Like, we only make one fundamental decision. Now, when we make that, I don't know. Like, do we make it before we come in or as children? But we can remake it. I do know as an adult that I can remake that decision. Do I live in a universe that is random, right? Like, stuff happens and I've got no control over it. It's just, effects flying everywhere and some are going to bump into me, right? Or do I live in a universe that is mathematically precise and orderly, meaning that nothing comes to me except through my consciousness, which is a synonym for perception.
Exactly.
So it's our consciousness that determines our experience. And if you just trace it back from your perspective, what am I seeing in the world right now? What am I experiencing? So I look at that and I go, all right. It's I either name it good or bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what our tendency to do. But what if it wasn't good or bad? What if it just was what's showing up because of the way I'm looking at it and what I'm filtering it through? I'm filtering it through my belief. So
Mm-hmm.
then I take a step back and I trace it back and back and back. What must I believe in order to have this in my experience? And that's where my point of power is.
Oh, that's beautiful. You know what you just said too just triggered something for me, Lori. It was when you only look at a situation from one point of view, then
Mm-hmm.
you completely forget or you completely obliterate any other possible answer to whatever's going on or whatever is happening in your life. If you're looking at it like Gloria said, like, oh, life is coming at me. I mean, the devil's after me every day. He's chasing me around. He's just trying to make me miserable. You know, if you're looking at it from that perspective, then guess what you're going to get? You're going to get the devil chasing you around, making you miserable. But the reality is that what you are putting out there and what you're looking at a situation. So how you're looking at it, if you just change your perception to, I like to use the form of a cube, and it has 6 sides. And I think that is the minimum number of possibilities in any situation. So what are you making assumptions about? What are you taking personal about this? You know, are you coming at it from a place of love? Or are you just stuck in your own viewpoint and there's no other viewpoint except your own? And that's when you get into trouble, I think. Go ahead, Lori.
Yeah, I love that metaphor of the cube with the sides. All right, so let me take that one step forward. If the whole devil thing, right? Like that whole, I know you don't believe in the devil, but let's say somebody does believe in that. So that cube, those 6 sides will all have to fit in with that belief of good and evil. No side will show up on that cube that does not fit with duality, with 2 separate powers, with good and evil. That cube, every single side, no matter how they toss it in the air, how they look at what they're looking at, that cube, every side will come from that perception. It's the perception creates the cube. And once you have the cube, then you can turn it any which way, but it's going to always go back to the perception.
Right.
You can change your perspective, but it doesn't truly change unless you've examined your perception, your belief.
Exactly.
That was such a good metaphor, Cheryl.
But what we have to think about, though, is that, you know, our beliefs is what actually creates our external, what's going on outside. So if inside of you, you have a belief of less than, or you don't trust yourself, you don't trust other people, you feel like you're not safe anywhere, well, that's what's going to happen. That is what's going to unfold. And so, Lori, have you ever had an experience? You had an experience with this. So please, would you mind sharing that with us?
Absolutely. I think it's a really my personal journey. I mean, I've experienced this firsthand from a pretty dramatic perspective. So I was, most of you watching, I'm sure know that at one stage in my life, I was agoraphobic. And so my perception of the world, the dice I was throwing, no matter how I looked at it, came up that I was not safe. Every side said not safe with another something under it. But ultimately that die, that cube was not safe. I live in a random universe. Stuff happens to me. So I could throw that cube in the air and it would land on victim half the time, right? Because I had to believe that I was a victim of something in order to have that experience. I also had to believe I was separate from, that I was not one with life. I didn't believe I created life. I believed it was random. Every side of that cube had some perspective that was not serving me until I was able to get a new cube. And that was because I changed my perception. And here's the thing, within each one of us is the perception of truth. It lives in us. It is us.
Mhm.
It's who we are. So when you tap into that, all those cubes that, aren't serving you, they just disappear and a whole new set of cubes show up. And every side of that cube is good. Every side of that cube is good and better good and more good and best, better, best. It's you can stand in any perspective and suddenly life is unfolding perfectly. And if something shows up you don't like, you just go, okay, all right, what was I believing? What am I paying attention to?
Mhm.
Where attention goes, energy flows. So all my attention was going towards staving off fear, really, right? Like I was afraid all the time and I spent all my energy trying to be safe. That was all I did. Just stay safe. Don't do anything that was going to upset my little apple cart, right? Don't take a step too far to the right or too far to the left because that was not my safety zone. That's how you become agoraphobic. You just keep shrinking your world until it's so tiny it fits in an apartment. Once I changed my perception and it was through intuition. It really was. Like, as I said, it lives in us. And Ernest Holmes talks about that a lot in the Science of Mind
Mhm.
text, that perception is intuition. It's like it just cracks our hearts open and says, this is it. This is the truth. This is who you are. This is what you are. And you are at choice. And the second you see that and you come from that perception, all my perspectives change. And I saw things that had always been there. But when I was in fear, I couldn't see them. They were still there, but they were invisible to me. They existed, just could not see them. It's almost like, if you have a Word document and it's black on white, and then you go and you change the font to white and you can't see it anymore, but it's still there. So all that white font was sitting there and I highlighted it and all of a sudden it was like, oh, there it is. Now I've got choice, and it came to me to pack up and to move to California. And now, given I couldn't walk around the block, that was a pretty big leap. I,
Wow.
but that's the miracle that can happen when you change your perception. All of a sudden, my perspective about life changed. I was like, I could see so much more. My vantage point was coming from up here, looking at the big picture rather than getting caught up in the little this and that's of life.
Yeah. Gosh, that's a great story. I know you've spoken of it before, but Lori, it's just, to me, that just shows you how much spiritual courage you have. And that's what it is. Sometimes you just have to just grab hold and just hang on and just figure out, why am I feeling this way? Or what
Yes.
do I need to do? And so once you can see from a different point of view, and that's the whole difference right there. And that's why I say it's perspective creates perception. So once you can see it from a different point of view, it changes the way that you see life around you. It changes the situations that occur in your life. They change. And
Hmm.
then, it's not necessarily that, like you were saying, that you put a label on it of bad or good. You just recognize that, okay, I brought this on. What was I thinking? I mean, and it's because everything that's going on around us is nothing but energy, in form or unformed. And
Hmm.
so we are the creators of our universe. Does that sound arrogant? No, because why else would we be here if we did not have free will to choose what we're doing? We'd just be little puppets dancing on a string, and so then it could be pretty, so then God's up there saying, oh, let's see what we can make this one do. It's not like that. It's more a case of, by giving us free will, we are the embodiment of God expressing through this human body. And there's no separation between this human body and that spirit. What happens though is we start building our own beliefs. We start building walls. We start building barriers to the truth of who we are. And we lose sight of who we are. And then we start believing in the external world is controlling us rather than us controlling our world. And that's kind of a scary thing right there, to think that you control your world, and why on earth is this showing up then? It's like, uh-oh, what did I do? But
well, we have to remember we're swimming in a sea of consciousness. If there's only one consciousness, then, there's an interplay there. And I think people go to, how did I create this, and beating themselves up for creating something they don't want. Well, it's not about beating yourself up. There's so much going on below the surface of our conscious awareness. Like most things are driven by that. I think Joe Dispenza says 95% of what we think and what we do is repetitive, right? It's not, we're a new thought, but very seldom do we have a new thought. Think about it. How often do we actually have a brand new thought? Brand new. Right? So right now I'm studying quantum physics with Dr. James. There's a lot of new thought there. Holy moly. And that's why, if anybody watched service Sunday, he said we're calling our Thursday night the class class. Like, I don't know. We end up with more questions than answers. But what happens in the question, when you don't have the answer and you hold it all lightly and you live the question, you're backing up and backing up and backing up. And then all those possible perspectives show up and you get to choose. And it's not even spirituality, it's science. Ernest Holmes got it right. He intuited what now science is proving through quantum physics. And that's exciting. It really is exciting. Nothing comes to us without our engagement of it, without our observation of it. Everything lives as possibility and probability. Everything. It can be overwhelming, right? It's like, oh, so many choices.
We just, that's it. That sometimes it's the fear of not knowing. But Ernest Holmes, the cool thing about him was he even says at the very opening chapter of his book that it is a culmination of teachings, that he's bringing it together into a cohesive way of looking at it, which Thomas Stroher did the same thing, only he took his from Hinduism and from ancient teachings like the Vedas and Upanishads. And so, but he was a culminator as well. I mean, he had a lot of really good observations, but if you go back and you study, so this quantum physics thing that Lori's speaking about has been known for centuries.
Yes, it has.
It's known for centuries that there is only one power. Now, it got diverted and just kind of diluted and diverted through religion a lot of times, because religion was more of a way to control the masses. The most people didn't read, so you were told what to believe. You were told if you did this and you did this, you'd go to heaven. So it was an easy way just to, okay, as long as I buy into this, then I'm safe, right? But
well, religion is perception, right? It's a box. It's a box. Right. And if you believe a certain way, your perspective will be a certain way. So religion is the perception, carries with it core perceptions, not just perceptions, but really, really core perceptions.
Oh, yeah.
We have a bunch of comments and questions.
There was a good one just came up from Dale, actually. I love it, Dale. Put us on the hot seat. And she says, I know someone who sees victimization in everything. And when I give a different point of view, she says she is seeing the truth and gets defensive. How would you approach that? Well, being a full-time victim for most of my life, I think I could take this one. It's just that being a victim is not something that you want to be. What it is that you have forgotten who you are. And you have just through a period of time and over, things have just unfolded in maybe it's not even something that you created, but the people around you have created certain situations and dramas and all this other stuff that you get kind of tied up in it. And so for me, being a victim was that I just never went back and cleaned out the garbage that I was hauling around with me. And everything I did, my perception about everything, my perspective, everything was based on the garbage I was dragging behind me. I always expected it not to turn out well because, look, I had so much past experience to prove it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so you know what? You have to, when you get to a point to where that is a comfort zone for you, because even though you are drawing negativity to you, at least you know what you're in for or what you expect. And so it's so easy to get into that. But when you decide to move out of Victimville and you decide to become a whole and complete person, you have to go back and go through all of that garbage. And I'm not saying you throw out every belief you have. You know what works for you, and you know what's important to you and what resonates within you. So, but you do need to go back and see where everything is getting skewed. So you need to just know that you have to change your perspective. And then you're not skewing everything anymore. You're starting to see life in a whole different way. So, Lori, I'm going to let you take it because my battery, for some reason, is not charging. So I'll be
Okay. Okay.
down, guys.
I love that she disappeared underneath. So I love, somebody just said, Wayne Baldwin said, convinced against their will of the same opinion still. So I think all we can do in that situation, Dale, and I'm sure you already know this, is know the truth for that person. Know who they are, understand who they are, continue to come from the perspective that all is well. Because when people are feeling victimized, they've lost all as well, right? They're stressed, their body's in reaction mode, their amygdala, their monkey mind is activated. And sometimes when we try to convince them to see a different perspective, they can't in that moment because their perception is giving them that cube that no matter how they turn it, it comes to victim, right? So that perception that you know to be true, which is that they are the creative energy of the universe and that they're always at choice, just holding that space, listening to somebody, I find really helps, because a lot of times we're trying to fix people, right? When they're really upset, we want to make it better. We just do. And that's partly from a compassionate heart and partly from our own discomfort, right? It's uncomfortable being around somebody who is stressed out and in victim mode. I know it's uncomfortable for me. And so my instinct is to want to fix that. And it's taking that deep breath and saying, there's nothing to fix here. All is well no matter what. I certainly don't want somebody I love and care about to have a bad experience. But the way I can help them most is to remember who they are, to listen, to be that presence of love, and knowing that there's only one consciousness and one energy. When you stand next to somebody from that place, they can kind of borrow your context, which is really borrowing your perception, right? They borrow your perception of all as well. And from that place, all of a sudden that cube can change and they may begin to see, and I say may because they're always at choice, but they may begin to see other opportunities. It is fascinating. I think it's it's a big challenge. It really is. How do we not, who's going to be the dominant consciousness in a conversation? I think it's the person who is all as well. I really do. And I think staying steadfast in that's not my perception. That's not my perspective. Here's what I'm seeing. And you can share that and they'll either say, oh, wait a minute, maybe, or not. But you can't be really attached. We are all creating our own reality.
no, that's the hard part. And
It is
especially
hard.
being practitioners, and Lori being a minister, and all of that, that we train and we do this because we love to be of service. I do not think that anyone that is a practitioner or is a minister doesn't want to give something back to the world in the form of, helping people, or helping. Mainly, I went into it to help myself. I have to admit it. It was true, and I needed it. But once I got in there, then it's so weird. Once, it's like you can't unring the bell. Once you see that perspective from a different point of view, it's really difficult to hold on and just get entrenched and just, hang on for dear life to something that is not true. And even though you have made it true, you have believed it for a long time, and now you have to step back and say, wait a minute, that's not true. But this is what's formed who I am. This is who I am. And that's the one thing I think that is the most important to remember, is when your perception or your beliefs are taking you to a place of darkness, or a place of hate, or prejudice, or any racism, whatever it is, then you need to really stop and think, is this serving me? Is this really who I am? I don't care if your parents believe this, if they taught you this, whatever. You as an adult, I always used to say, once you're 18, you can't blame your parents for anything anymore, because you are now autonomous. Before you were under the control of your parents, and you had to and that's where you learned most of what your peers, your parents, and all this other stuff. So if you're raised in a place or in a family that has like negativity all the time, or maybe there's mental illness, and so you don't really understand what's going on, and you just have to say life is crazy, but in reality, you just have to stop and examine those feelings. And examine and say, that's not who I am. This is who I am. And that's the beauty of this teaching, and the message of this teaching is that I am a spiritual being having a human experience. And I am here I think I'm here just to show God a good time personally, but I don't know what anyone else feels. But if I'm not living to my full potential to be full of joy and full of happiness, if there's something that's pulling me down from that happiness, that as, who was it that Tiffany in our class, we had a class together, said, when I did my talk, I said, I don't know why, but I wake up every day unreasonably happy. And because I don't have a reason per se, a specific reason why I'm happy, I just am. And, and to me, that has been the greatest gift I've ever received in my entire life, is to come out of being a victim and thinking life is coming at me, to being that person and in that space where I wake up with joy. And I know no matter what appears in my life today, that whatever it is, maybe it's not something that I would perceive, as Lori said, I would label as good or bad. Maybe I'd label it as bad, but with my perspective, if I step back and I look at it, I always find a lesson or something I needed to learn, something I needed to know, or just, something that says, Cheryl, you should have changed those tires sooner and you wouldn't have had a flat. So he's sitting there going, oh, I had a flat. Look what I did. I had a flat, And then I get there to the shop and they go, God, your tires are all bad. And I said, yeah, I slid into home plate. I used every bit of them, didn't I? But the reality is I could go to that negative space and say, oh, I had a flat. This is horrible. Or I can say, take responsibility, Cheryl. You knew you needed new tires. Why hadn't you done it? So that's it. And I think that is the most freeing thing, is being responsible for my own life. That whatever's occurring in my life, I'm responsible. Any relationship I'm in, I'm not 100% responsible for any relationship, but I am 50%. So
I'm 100% responsible for my response.
Right. But 50%, if there's this going on, 50% is yours. 50% is theirs. Nobody is all right and nobody is all wrong. Just remember that. Nobody is all bad. Nobody is all good. These are just manifestations of the, that we create because we have the power to do so. We use our power for good, or we can use our power for not so good. It just depends upon what that belief system is, how it's unfolded in your life, and how it's appeared in your life, and how you're perceiving it. Mm-hmm. See, I'm taking it from the perspective again back to my perception. But perspective also shows you different points of view all the time, constantly showing you different.
It does, but it will only show you what fits in with your perception. It's the cube. No matter how you turn that perspective, it will only give you a side that fits in with your perception, your world belief, the viewpoint of how you hold the world. If the perception is askew, the perspective will also be askew. They're two sides of the same coin.
Exactly.
You cannot separate them.
No, you
and
can't.
Working from effect back to cause is useful as long as you get that it's an effect. It's not cause, but it has great information for you. Like you said, going back and looking at all the things that you've gathered in a lifetime, mm-hmm. right? So just sometimes I think I think, God, that sounds like a lot of work. And I think I've kind of come to the place where rather than looking at all that, I just want to notice, where am I? And do I like where I am? And if I don't, let me change it and let the rest just take, it will atrophy on its own. If it's not fed, it will die off. Mm-hmm. And I don't even have to worry about anything that came before this moment. Why? Because principle is not bound by precedent. Exactly. This is a fresh starting point. None of that matters unless I make it matter. Unless I keep repeating it and thinking the same, if I don't fail to have a new thought, then it matters because now it's completely running the show. And it is the creative force in my life.
Exactly. So. But, that's why, when we say, oh, change your thoughts, change your life, change your thinking, change your life. And, everybody, it's like, how do I do that? I've had these thoughts, I've had this belief, I've had this for my entire life, and it served me all the way through here. But what formed it in the first place? And it had to form somewhere. And so if it formed somewhere and you bought into it, what makes you think you can't form something new and buy into that instead? So,
absolutely.
And so instead of sitting out there and just trying to gather all the information that proves your point of view, why don't you just stop and just say, wait a minute, what doesn't prove my point of view? What do I need to do to change the way I'm looking at this into a more positive aspect? It's easy sometimes we get tied up in situations like if you're going through a divorce or, your kids are giving you fits or whatever, and you just stop and you just think, oh, this is just how my life is. No, why you're upset has nothing to do with them. It has to do with what's going on inside of you. And so are you gathering evidence still to prove that my kids are driving me crazy? No, you just got to say, step back, take a breath. There's this great sign on the wall here. It says, it's called oxygen. Just sit down and breathe some in and you'll feel better. Sometimes that's just what you need to do. You just need to take a breath. And if you realize what Lori said was so true, every moment we can change. Every moment is a brand new moment. Mm-hmm. The word I just said is in the past. Whatever just occurred right now on this show is already in the past. But how am I stepping up? How am I showing up in my life? Am I showing up as the person that is believing what's going on is something that is coming at me? Or am I one of those people, like Laura said, I'm just going to observe this. I'm going to see why it's tweaking me. Where did I build this button on me that I'm pushing? Why is this bothering me? Why should it even matter to me?
Yeah, well, and if it's pushing a button, who installed the button? The button's in you. Has nothing to do with the other person. It's something inside of you that's getting activated, therefore it's there. And it's not a cause, it's simply an effect.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Dale asked me, please share the gathering evidence concept. I love this. This is, it really changed my perception. So once you have a conclusion, which, can be a perspective, right? You will only see that which fits into it. Everything else disappears from your sight. It's that whole whiteout thing I talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
When you change the text to white, you won't see it. So, you put your arm around somebody who's seeing something completely different because their perception is different, their perspective is different, and they literally are experiencing a viewpoint that you may not be able to see, right? We think, let's look together. Well, there has to be both of you backing up to a larger view in order to see more. You have to change that core belief or that conclusion that you're carrying. But the second you land on something, our brains are hardwired to only see what fits with what we believe. Hardwired. We're hardwired that way. That's part of our physicality. I mean, it's not just the metaphysical truth, but that metaphysical truth, the macro truth, is also in the micro, which is us. So we are hardwired to only see what fits with our belief. That's why when somebody is talking from a place of victim, they're seeing all this evidence to support, and it's there. I'm not saying it's not there. I think we try to tell people it's not there, and that irritates them, right?
Mm-hmm.
We say, look, what you're seeing isn't really there, right? We're doing almost like a spiritual bypass. It is there, and you are experiencing it, but you're experiencing it because you had a belief that then brought all that forward, that perspective forward for you to experience. Your point of power, the only point of power, is what you choose to believe. Once you are hanging on to that belief, everything else will fall into place.
Exactly.
Literally, waves will turn into particles based on how you look at something.
Oh.
Scientifically, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Rick Tamlin years ago said, it's all made up, right? He's a wonderful coach, and he's always saying, it's all made up. It's all made up. Well, he's right. It is all made up. It's all made up. So make
Yeah.
up something good.
Yeah, it
Can
is.
a person change their basic assumptions, speaking of gathering evidence? I don't think we change our beliefs, and I don't think we change our basic assumption. I don't think we change any of the language that would suggest. I think it all exists, all of it. It's all available to us. We don't change it. We simply shift the focus of our attention to something more interesting. So
Exactly.
is being
That's
a
it.
victim serving you is interesting, because chances are, in the moment somebody's being a victim, they're finding it pretty interesting, right? It's compelling. There's an energy, right, of anger, like righteous anger. They did this to me, or this happened, and there's all this like fervor around it, right? And they're captivated by it. Well, if that's what you're interested in, that will be your experience. Now find something, don't try to change that. Don't try to change being a victim. Let that go. Don't feed it. Shift the focus of your attention to a more interesting conversation. So
That's
when you talk, yeah,
yeah.
what's more interesting than this, really? And ask yourself, for me, I'll speak for myself. God, am I get bored with my own stuff? You ever just get bored? I
Yeah.
mean, really, some days it's like, oh, for goodness sakes, I'm just bored. I'm bored. I don't want to, it's not even about the experience. I don't even want to be in my own head. I just, let me shift the focus of my attention, and boom. Like the other day, I was not feeling well. And all of a sudden, got a bunch of work thrown at me, right? It was like came very out of nowhere, like I wasn't expecting it. And I'll tell you, I shift the focus of my attention. I was actually on my way to lay down and literally turned my body around and went in front of the computer and started my work. Well, I took my attention off that, put my attention over here on being creative, being productive, and being a contribution. What do you think happened? I felt a hell of a lot better. I forgot I wasn't feeling well.
Yeah.
I did. And I didn't try to make myself feel better. I didn't even put an ounce of energy on feeling better. I simply shifted my attention over to being a contribution, to being creative, to using my energy in a way that was of service to myself and others. And then boom. So, Gilmore to add, I happen to know Gilmore's basic assumption, which I will not share here because it's not mine to share. It's just shifting, and I've certainly, Gilmore's a great example. I watch him go and then shift. Oh, he sees it. I'm doing it again. There it is. Like I see, oh my God, I'm so bored with that. And then I just simply go, oh, that's not very interesting anymore. And I just shift my attention to something else.
That is so perfect.
It's a lot easier, isn't it?
I think so, but it just depends upon how entrenched you are and what you think is defining you and who you are. But it's so
entrenched is a perception.
Exactly.
If you think you're entrenched, you're going to have to work your butt off to get unentrenched.
There. Well,
seriously, unless you're lying in a trench, you can't be entrenched.
I know, but think about this though. I just remember meeting with someone one time that had this list of things that their mother had done to them. I mean, and just went right down the list. Now we're talking somebody in their 50s, right? So they're still talking about from when they were a child, how their perception of their belief system was formed by one phrase their mother said or one thing their father said. And I'm sitting there and thinking about it. And I said, do you realize that you have allowed your whole life to be formed on 5 minutes of conversation? 5 minutes of something somebody said.
And you're not even remembering it as it happened because there is no reality outside of your perception.
Exactly. And your perception was, my mother hates me. My mother told me I was this. My mom said I was that. And so I can see as a child though, now as a child, these are the people that are supposed to love you, that are supposed to, be on your side, be in your court and teach you to be, to live in society. And to fit in, whatever. But if you allow just one sentence or one phrase or one thing to create this belief in you, then, if you're going back and you're examining your beliefs and you realize, oh, I got that belief from the time my mom said this, and it took her 30 seconds to say it, and now you're 50 years old and you're still living that, that's when I'm talking about getting entrenched into a belief.
Yes.
That is not necessarily true.
So that was her perception, right? My mother doesn't love me. Guess what? Once she decided that became her focus. All the evidence to now her mother could have loved her like crazy. She wouldn't have seen it and she would not have experienced it. Why? Because it did not fit with her already existing perception of her life. And so it disappeared for her. Doesn't mean it wasn't there. It was still there. It was still there. But she couldn't see it. It was the evidence coming forward.
It's the evidence. That was the evidence that started that belief. That was, I had this evidence my mother said. And then I let that belief, and other people might have said something or did things and said, see, my mother was right. My mother said. And so a 30-second phrase put out into the world that you drank it in and you put it into your perception and made it fit your perception of being something negative from your mother. And like you said, it's like, Edwina Gaines speaks of the little girl that was singing one day, and her mother had a horrible day at work and her head was pounding, and she came home, she goes, stop singing, you're not even that good. And from that moment forward, the little girl wouldn't sing anymore because she thought, I have a terrible voice because my mom told me so. You see, and actually she had a beautiful voice.
It was inaccurate. It wasn't even accurate.
It was in a moment
that
suddenly became a truth. This little girl, from her perception, made this into a truth and a belief. And then for the rest of her life, she always thought, I can't sing. And it was just and her mother probably never even realized. She was just in her own world and her own, pounding headache and tired and whatever, and just said something and not realizing how cruel or how it was going to affect. And that's the other thing. Watch your words. You don't realize that your words can really affect people. I mean, because especially if they're young or they're not sure of themselves or they're not trusting their own ability to know who they are, your words can cause harm. So that's the other thing about perception and perspective. But we're getting close to getting near the end, but not quite. Lori, come on, take us on home with something good.
Perception makes us receptive. So receptivity to whatever our perception is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I really think it's that. If you watch it, go watch What the Bleep Do We Know? There's a scene in that movie. Actually, you can go to YouTube. You're on YouTube probably, and Google the basketball scene from What the Bleep Do You Know? I love that scene because there's all these basketballs floating in air, and the little boy says to the woman, "They're all just sitting here waiting for you to pick one." And then the second she focuses on one, all the other ones disappear. And that's a great visual for the gathering evidence, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's all there. Evidence for anything you choose exists simultaneously, and you will only see that what you are receptive to based on your perception of life.
Or what
That
you're
is true.
attracting, what you're attracting to.
Well, you attract what you're equal to, what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you attract what your fits in with your perception.
Absolutely.
Yep.
But yeah, but just, I was trying to, the reason I was saying that perspective forms and instead of the other way around, but I love the idea of it's just two sides, one coin.
Mhm.
But but if you take it back to being a child, and to being a child, you don't have any preformed perceptions when you first start out. So everything is from a perspective of being a child. Everything is there. As you get older, though, then you've built these perceptions. That's when you start getting into trouble. If it's
Mhm.
not the right point of view, if it's not true, and if you built something that is a false belief, then that's when you have to step back and say, okay, my perception is forming my perspective of the world. So Lori's right there.
So I know we're coming to an end, but I'm just going to throw this out to mess with y'all. What if there is no there is no wrong belief? What if there is no truth? It's all true. It's
Mm-hmm.
all true. Now what do you want to experience? Take right and wrong out of it, take truth and false out of it. There is no such thing according to science and according to what we teach.
Exactly.
It doesn't exist. Now what do you want to experience? Period.
Exactly.
That's it. And that makes it so like simple. And I want to share, I'm sure you looked up the definitions of perspective and perception, right?
Mm-hmm.
So normally we go with a particular attitude towards something or a point of view, right? When we talk of perspective. But how about this? The art of drawing solid objects on a two-dimensional surface as so to give them the right impression in their height, width, depth, position, and relationship to each other when viewed for a particular point. The art of drawing solid objects. Isn't that a cool definition? Because isn't that what we're doing? We're drawing from our conclusions, from our beliefs, we are drawing, bringing into being solid objects. That's really cool.
And if you think about it, the way that we perceive the world with our eyes, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know that a person is 5'6", but if they're 100 yards away, they're this tall. So what is our perspective there? Because the further away we are from it, the smaller it becomes, right?
And that's true. And that's true. Like the further we get away from our effects, our experience of life, the further we can step back, the smaller our issues become, our problems become until they just disappear. They disappear if you step back far enough into reality, right? Which is the quantum field. When you step back into the quantum field, none of that matters.
Exactly.
You can't even see it. It's just, it doesn't exist. And now, where do I want to play? What do I want to create? Play. I mean, oh my God. Yeah, let's play.
Well, Lori, I'm going to just leaving it on that beautiful note of let's just all go play. I would like, would you please just do a little benediction for
sure.
Do a benediction quickly and just close us out. And thank you everyone for being with us today. It's just been a great great time. And Lori, wow, what a great stimulating conversation.
Well,
I knew this was going to be fun.
I just want to thank you for inviting me. This was awesome. And thank you, everyone online, for participating. Your comments and your questions really help move us along. And, you know, it's so wonderful when there's a back and forth. So I really appreciate it. So, you know, just want to say thank you to everything that has come before this moment. Thank you. And to everything yet to come. Yes, that's Dag Hammarskjöld. What a perspective. What a perception in which to live our lives. Simply saying yes and. Yes and. I am here, and what would I like to experience today? So what I know is we all go out and play in this quantum field today and just enjoy ourselves. Because as Thomas Troward said, I know this is Cheryl's favorite person, we are here to enjoy life. What if that was our perception? What if that was our perspective? How would things change? Oh, wow. I think it'd be pretty awesome. And so it is.
And so it is. Thank you so much. Thank you, Krista, for your support. And we'll see you in about 4 weeks, gang. So bye-bye.
Bye.